It was one of those warm Saturday afternoons when my BBQ place was buzzing with life, the smell of smoked brisket in the air, country music humming in the background, and folks laughing over plates stacked high with ribs and cornbread. I'd been running this little restaurant for years, and most days were smooth, until the day the HOA decided to make me their personal target. I'd had my share of disagreements with them over silly things like a banner being too bright or my outdoor tables not matching the neighborhood aesthetic. But what happened that afternoon took things to a whole new level. I first noticed them standing at the entrance, two HOA board members I recognized right away. They walked in like they owned the place, sat down, and ordered the most expensive items on the menu without so much as a glance my way. I didn't think too much of it at first. After all, I try to treat everyone who comes in with the same kindness. But when they finished eating, they didn't head for the counter. Instead, one of them smirked, leaned over to the other, and said something that made my stomach drop. "We're not paying for this. Let's see him do something about it." Before I could even process what was happening, they pulled out their phones. Within minutes, police officers were walking through my door, but instead of listening to me, they were laughing along with the HOA members. I could hardly believe it. They didn't ask questions, didn't want to hear my side. It was as if the whole thing was some kind of joke to them. My customers sat frozen, whispering among themselves, unsure whether to leave or stay. That's when I realized something. I had proof. And once I brought it forward, the laughter stopped cold. The looks on their faces when the tables turned. Well, let's just say that by the end of the night, I weren't the ones walking free. I wasn't new to dealing with the HOA, but this was different. For months, they'd been finding little ways to make my life harder. First, it was letters about my unsightly smoker in the back lot, even though it was well within code. Then they complained about the smell of BBQ drifting into the neighborhood. It's as if the scent of slow-cooked ribs was some kind of public nuisance. Each time, I played by the rules, thinking it would keep the peace. But the truth was, they didn't want peace. They wanted control. The two members who came in that day, Marlene and Greg, had reputations that stretched far beyond HOA meetings. People in town whispered about how they used their positions to push around anyone they didn't like. They'd made a habit of calling in favors, pulling strings, and bending rules when it suited them. I'd even heard a rumor that Greg's brother-in-law worked at the police department, which might explain why the officers treated my restaurant like it was their private clubhouse that afternoon, as they sat there smirking. The officers leaning casually on my counter, I felt a wave of frustration building. I knew better than to lose my cool, especially with a crowd watching. But inside, I was running through every possible way to prove what had happened. My staff hovered near the kitchen doorway, eyes wide, not sure if they should step in. A couple of regulars mouthed to me, "What's going on?" But I didn't answer. I was already thinking about the security cameras. I'd installed them months earlier after a break-in scare, never imagining they'd capture something like this. But as soon as I remembered, I knew they were my lifeline. Every order, every bite, every word they'd said, all of it was recorded. The officers didn't know that. Neither did Marlene or Greg. I kept my expression calm, even as my mind raced. I let them believe they had the upper hand. But in my gut, I knew this wasn't over. Something told me that once I pressed play on that footage, the whole game would change, and not in their favor. I slipped into the back office while the officers were still chatting with Marlene and Greg like old friends. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding hard enough to hear in my ears. I pulled up the camera feed, scrolling back to when they first walked in. There it was, every frame, crystal clear. Them sitting down, placing their order, laughing, eating, and then saying out loud they wouldn't pay. I even caught one of them glancing toward the counter to see if I'd overheard, but having the footage was one thing. Using it against people who seemed untouchable was another. I'd seen neighbors try to stand up to the HOA before, and it didn't always end well. Some lost battles over property disputes, others mysteriously failed inspections. A few even had fines pile up so high. They gave up and moved. That thought stuck with me. If they could pull strings to avoid paying for a meal, what else could they get away with? Out front, the atmosphere had shifted. My customers were uncomfortable, some pretending to focus on their plates while sneaking glances at the table by. The window, my head chef, Miguel, leaned in through the office door and whispered, "Boss, they're telling people you overcharged them, trying to make you look bad." It was like watching someone throw matches on dry grass. The fire was starting to spread. I thought about calling a lawyer, but then I remembered something else. Just last month, a food truck owner a few towns over told me his run-in with Marlene ended when she tried the same stunt on him. He didn't have proof, though. I did. The question was, should I go straight to the police chief with the footage? Or let them keep talking until they buried themselves deeper? My gut told me to wait, but every minute they stayed in my restaurant felt like an attack on my reputation. I stepped back toward the dining area. The USB drive with the footage in my pocket, I could see them glance at me, and for the first time, I noticed a flicker of something in their eyes. Not confidence, not smugness. Something else entirely. I walked back into the dining room slowly, letting the tension hang in the air. The chatter had died down to a low hum, and all eyes seemed to follow me as I passed between the tables. Marlene's smile was tighter now, her fingers tapping on the edge of her plate. Greg leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, but his jaw was clenched. The officers were still there, though their laughter had faded into awkward glances between each other. It was as if everyone could feel something was about to happen, but no one knew exactly what. I stopped just short of their table. "You sure? You're not forgetting something?" I asked, keeping my voice calm but letting the words cut through the silence. Marlene tilted her head like she hadn't heard me, and Greg gave a little scoff. "We've already explained," he said. "This food wasn't worth paying for. Ask them," and he nodded toward the officers like they were his personal backup. But the room had shifted. My regular customers weren't buying it, and even a couple of strangers looked like they were quietly pulling out their phones to record. I didn't show my hand, not yet. That USB drive in my pocket felt heavier than gold. Miguel appeared behind the counter, arms crossed, giving me a small nod. It was our unspoken signal. "We've got your back." The pressure in my chest grew. I could either let them walk out and risk the story spreading before I could counter it, or I could act now, in front of everyone. Then one of the officers cleared his throat like he was about to say something but hesitated. That hesitation told me more than words. Maybe they didn't know exactly what was coming. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice so only the table could hear. "I've got everything you've said today. Every bite, every word, on video." 4. The first time since they walked in, Greg's smirk slipped. Marlene blinked fast, her tapping fingers going still. The whole room seemed to lean in, sensing the shift. I could feel it too, the moment before the storm breaks. Greg opened his mouth, but before he could fire back, the restaurant door swung open so hard it rattled the glass. A man in a dark suit stepped in, scanning the room like he already knew exactly who he was looking for. He didn't glance at me, didn't greet the officers. He walked straight to Marlene and Greg's table. "Marlene, Greg," he said, voice low but firm. "We need to talk. Now." The shift in their expressions was instant. Whatever smugness they had left drained away. Greg sat up straighter, and Marlene's eyes darted toward the door as if she was calculating an escape. The suited man leaned in, whispering something I couldn't hear. But I caught the way Greg's hands tightened into fists under the table. The Officers exchanged looks, clearly unsure whether to step in or stay quiet. The whole restaurant was frozen. Even the sizzle from the kitchen seemed to fade. I couldn't shake the feeling that this man wasn't here for me at all. He was here for them. Then the twist hit me. I recognized him. He'd been in my restaurant before, months ago, eating alone in the corner and paying in cash. He was a private investigator. I remembered because we'd chatted briefly. And he'd mentioned working in the neighborhood. What was a pie doing showing up in the middle of this? The tension thickened. Marlene started speaking in a rush, her voice shaking just enough to notice. Greg kept glancing at me, then at the pie, then at the officers, like the walls were closing. In the pie's voice stayed calm, but I caught one phrase that made my stomach drop. "It's bigger than you think." I didn't know what it was, but the way the room felt, I knew this wasn't just about a free meal anymore. Something was happening behind the scenes, something the HOA had been hiding, and now it was cracking open right here in my restaurant. The pie straightened, glanced my way for a brief moment, then said to the officers, "You might want to hear this." That was the moment I realized the night was far from over. It